Can you imagine how scared I was when Grandpa put me in the coffin with the snake? Let's start today's story. One dark night, my grandfather went so far as to put 12-year-old me and a female snake into a coffin in order to prove that snakes are inherently lustful. I was terrified, but I didn't dare to resist. However, what I did not expect is that the next day, I woke up. I am not lying next to the snake but a beautiful woman, and the belly is also surprisingly large. Instantly I was scared, but my grandfather saw the situation not sad but happy, and even threatened to set up 800 tables of banquets to celebrate with the whole village. I am very puzzled. I cannot help but think, Grandpa is not crazy? Later, my grandfather explained to me that because I was born with an extremely mean fate, my grandfather, who knew a little bit about feng shui, let me sleep in a coffin. At that time, all the children in the village distanced themselves from me, isolating me and saying that only the dead would sleep in coffins. I thought I would be alone for the rest of my life, but in the summer when I was 6 years old, an injured blue python completely changed my fate. That night, the adults had flashlights on as if they were looking for something, but my grandfather had said I shouldn't go out at night. However, out of curiosity, I opened the window, and just then a blue python came into my room. I fixed my eyes on it, and it had 6 wounds on its body. The same ominous object moved me to compassion, and it seemed to share my feelings and did not harm me. I hastily hid it inside the coffin. Just then, there was a knock on my room door. Grandpa asked me if I had seen anything, and I pretended to be sleepy and replied, no. The villagers standing outside the door then asked me if I had seen anything. The villagers who were standing outside the door left. The snake poked its head out to show its gratitude, and I slept with it for 6 years until the night before my 12th birthday. Grandpa walked into my room with a handful of incense and said, the next 7 nights are critical. If you get through them safely, you'll still be alive. If you don't, it's your life. What does Grandpa mean? I asked suspiciously. Grandpa sighed and said, do you know why I let you sleep inside the coffin all the time? Your 8 characters are an extremely mean destiny. This kind of destiny is 1 in a million. This is the destiny of a ghost taking over. And 12 is the art of manifestation. After 12 o'clock tonight, you'll be 12 years old. 7 is the art of returning to the soul. Your extreme fate will slowly reveal itself and will reach a peak after 7 days. By then, all the lonely souls and ghosts within a 100-mile radius will come to compete for your body. Grandpa, really? Don't you scare me, I said with some shivering. Grandpa lifted the quilt covering the top of the coffin, revealing many yellow talisman papers, and said with a heavy face, I've always told you to sleep inside the coffin, and that's because when you sleep your yang qi will drop, and your yin qi will radiate out. This coffin is surrounded by talismans, which can lock those yin qi from being discovered by the wandering ghosts around. But you've reached the age of manifestation. The talisman can't suppress it. Now we can only pray that there aren't too many lone souls and wild ghosts within 100 miles. I nodded silently, and after Grandpa went out, I lay down in the coffin as usual. I didn't sleep all night that night, holding the snake tightly. Although nothing happened to me the next day, 6 people died in the village for no reason. After they died, blue snake scales grew out of their limbs. It was a big deal because people remembered the blue snake from 6 years ago. The first thing I thought of was the blue snake that resided inside my coffin, because the snake scales were basically the same color. Once again, the people inside the village were acting like crazy because it had been almost 7 years since the time was counted. That day, all the people in the village came to my house and told Grandpa to think of something. They were the ones who said that if the snake was not killed, it would be 7 years later. In my mind, I even almost decided that the death of those 6 people had something to do with the blue snake inside my coffin. I hurried to the coffin in the room, and the snake was still there. Did you kill the people? I asked, shivering. The snake looked at me and shook its head, then leaned its head on my shoulder. It settled me down quite a bit with that gesture. I kept telling myself that the snake had been in my coffin the whole time, and that it had no time to harm the 6 people inside the village. It was noisy outside, and those villagers were pushing Grandpa to think of something. The villagers didn't leave until noon, and only then did I climb out of the coffin and walk to the hall. I heard my grandfather say with a sad face, to beat a snake, it needs 7 souls to become a spirit. Now 6 have died, and 1 more will die. If that snake really becomes essence, the whole village will be finished. 1 more will die? I asked in surprise. Grandpa nodded and said, well, and it's just tonight. The 6 people who died then were all people who had wounded the snake back then. The remaining 1 had no idea who that snake would harm. I remembered again that when that snake crawled into my coffin, it did have 6 wounds on its body. Thinking of this, I hurriedly asked, Grandpa, those 6 people were bitten to death by the snake? Grandpa shook his head and said, no. In fact, when a snake is about to become an essence, it doesn't even need to bite itself to death. Even if it is nestled in a cave, it has ways to harm people. I stood up violently. What's wrong with you? Grandpa frowned, and I clenched my teeth and told him about the snake. Grandpa, in fact, that blue snake has been in my coffin the whole time. Slap. Grandpa slapped his hand on the table and said with a face full of anger, what did you say? I told Grandpa all the causes and consequences of the matter. Grandpa was completely furious now and raised his hand to slap over. I was so young and dumbfounded by Grandpa's slap that I opened my mouth and started bawling. Grandpa didn't care that I was crying and dragged me towards my room. Walking to the coffin, he lifted the quilt on the coffin. However, the snake had already disappeared. Grandpa looked at me with a cold face and said with his mouth, the tail goods have a way to avoid demonic disasters, and there is nothing I can do about it. There's no need to look for it. You'll wait for death tonight. Grandpa, it won't harm me, I said stubbornly. And at this moment, Grandpa picked up a thumb-thick willow branch and chased me all over the house to whip it. While pumping it, he also apologized. A small child doesn't know any better and offended the great immortal. The great immortal is not to be blamed. In the end, I directly fainted from the pain. Immediately afterward, Grandpa directly threw me on the bed and then went out the door. In the middle of the night, I woke up in pain again. My whole body could barely move. And I also found that my hands and feet were tied up with willow branches by Grandpa. At this time, I cried out loudly, but my grandfather did not respond. Just then, a stunningly beautiful woman wearing a tight blue dress and short skirt pushed the door in. Who are you and why did you come to my house? I asked, staring at the woman. She didn't say anything, and before I could respond, the woman had already arrived in front of me. She raised her hand against my chin and kissed me. I subconsciously retreated and asked, Fairy sister, who are you? Are you here to find my grandfather? No, I'm here for you, I said with some hand-wringing. But I don't know you. No, you know me. At that moment, the woman reached out and touched those wounds on my body that had been drawn out by the willow branches. She smiled wanly again and suddenly bent down, stuck out her tongue, and gently licked on top of my wounds. A burst of tingling came from the surface of my skin, and I couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. That feeling was too comfortable. Even though my hands and feet were tied, it didn't affect the pleasure that Fairy Sister brought me at all. Fairy Sister, can you help me untie the willow branch? I actually had bad thoughts. She smiled and shook her head. No. Fairy Sister looked at me with incomparably charming, seductive eyes and said, Am I beautiful? Beautiful, I said dully. Want me? I'm sure what happened next didn't interest anyone, so I skipped it. I'll see you again, little brother. Just pretend what happened today never happened. You're not allowed to tell anyone about it. When you grow up, your sister will marry you. I was instantly excited and incoherent. Fairy Sister, are you telling the truth? You marry me? Well, really. But you can't tell anyone about the two of us, including your grandfather. Do you hear me? I'll be responsible, I said with a firm face. But you're too young to be responsible now. When you're 18, my sister will marry you. Without waiting for my answer, a pot of cold water poured down. Grandpa stood in front of me and said coldly, Oh no, the wound really scabbed over in one night. Quickly get up and follow me. Grandpa, where to? My mouth had just squeezed out a few words when my consciousness blurred once again. When I opened my eyes, it was already dark. Grandpa and another old man were sitting in front of the bed, and that old man was kind-looking, with 2 eyes staring earnestly at me. Opened his mouth, eyes gone out of focus, yellowing of the Hall of Seals. This is a sign of an unexpected and horizontal death. With a black tongue and purple lips, you will die horizontally within 7 days. Zhao Laodi, this little baby is at the end of his days. Ah. Grandpa's face turned blue and glanced at me. Old brother who? This grandson of mine has no father and no mother, and he hasn't had a good life after me, so please show me a clear path. The old man who was called Old Brother who by his grandfather sighed. The wound scabs over, but the pain remains. This is a sign of non-acceptance. Elder brother Zhao, you've almost beaten this little waif to death, and that snake immortal still refuses to give up. This shows that that snake immortal is determined to take her life. Grandpa nodded and said, I know that too. I know a bit more about ghost matters, but Old Brother who is better at demon matters than I am. 6 people have died now. the Western-style snake demon's reincarnation technique. If you want to avoid this, the only way is to find a backer for little Eva. Since ancient times, when demons and ghosts meet too do not survive, we have to find him a female ghost as a daughter-in-law. Grandpa shook his head and said, he's an extremely mean fate. I'm afraid he'll die faster if he gets married in the underworld. Grandpa Wu shook his head. There is no way to solve the snake demon's demand for his life, and the ghosts of the extreme Een destiny will break it. If you tie the right knot, you can save your life after the wedding. That snake demon has been with her night and day for nearly 7 years. If she takes her life to become a demon, the snake demon's Tao will helicopter for 70 years, and I'm afraid that no one will be able to subdue her at that time. Grandpa pondered for a while and slowly nodded his head. Hearing old man Liang speak of this, I endured the severe pain and rubbed myself up, saying stubbornly, I don't want a female ghost daughter-in-law. Grandpa Hu smiled, you've got it wrong. This ghost daughter-in-law is married to help you block calamities. It won't affect you getting a daughter-in-law in the future. My eyes lit up after hearing this. Grandpa, is it true? Of course it's true. Do you really think that people's female ghosts can accompany you for the rest of your life? They also have to reincarnate. I was particularly stifled in my heart at that time, and not being able to apologize to my fairy sister, I just had to pout and say, then Grandpa, find me a good-looking one. I want to choose myself. There is no good-looking female ghosts, but also choose your own. There are female ghosts willing to take you on the high side of the incense. You'll have to bear the consequences of the trouble you've caused. Grandpa wasn't afraid to hit me at all. Souls practice according to Buddha and Taoist ghosts. Elder Brother Zhao, go contact a troupe that sings ghost theater as soon as possible. Grandpa Wu spoke up. Grandpa nodded and went out the door. Grandpa Wu, on the other hand, brought along some tributes and dragged me to Cemetery Hill 5 miles away to invite ghosts. After waiting until dark, Grandpa Wu led me to start looking at the tombstones one by one. He looked at the graves to see if there was a man or a woman buried inside, and if it was a woman, he looked at how old she was when she died. Those who were over 25 years old were basically ignored, because those who were over 25 years old in the countryside had already married, and those who had married before their deaths could not get married in the underworld. After looking for more than 10 graves in a row, I finally found a woman who died at the age of 22. Grandpa, who took out an apple, lighting an incense burner, said with his mouth, tomorrow night at midnight, there will be a divine instrument at Old Zhao's house at the entrance of the Note Village, and there will be firecrackers as a guide. If the girl is interested, go and take a look. I kowtowed 3 times in a row and continued to look for the next eligible grave. We worshipped more than 10 graves in one night, and by the time we returned home, it was already noon. The troupe that sang the ghost opera had also come over, and Grandpa and the village people were setting up the stage. I sat quietly on a small bench and watched as Grandpa and the village people explained that they were using my life to attract the snake demon and get rid of it. When it was nearing completion, Grandpa had to manage the food, so he killed the only 2 large hens in the house. As I helped pluck the feathers from the chickens, I asked him, Grandpa, does this work? Grandpa sighed and said, there's no guarantee it will keep you alive, but you'll definitely die if you don't do it. The helpers went back after dinner, but among the theater people, there was one who looked very much like a fairy sister. It's just that we had an agreement that we couldn't recognize each other even if we met again. The troupe knew the rules of the ghost opera. First of all, I changed into a set of red bridegroom's clothes. 15-8 immortal table. I sat in the center. The table was covered with a white cloth, with incense burners, raw meat and fruits, etc. The bench was pressed with a stone. On the bench was a stack of yellow paper money pressed against a stone, and on the table in front of me were only 2 things. A jade ring that had been handed down in our family, and my birth date underneath the jade ring. Little brother, remember me? The person from the theater troupe who looked very much like Fairy Sister walked over and naturally sat next to me. As soon as he said this, I knew that he was the Fairy Sister. You really are the Fairy Sister. I didn't tell Grandpa about us, but he said that the only way to save my life was to get me a female ghost daughter-in-law. I feel sorry for you, I said carefully. Fairy Sister smiled and said, Grandpa is right. You are very good. I won't blame you. Are you afraid of finding a ghost daughter-in-law? Fairy Sister shook her head and secretly told you that I can actually see ghosts. Only they don't know it. Ghosts are not scary at all. By the way, do you have any requirements for a ghost daughter-in-law? I don't have any requirements, as long as it's not scary. If I can, I want her to be pretty. The Fairy Sister suddenly looked at me seriously. Kid, what's your name? My name is Zhaomo, the Silent One. The Fairy Sister suddenly smiled wryly. This was your name before. After singing the ghost opera, you won't be called this name anymore. Why? I asked suspiciously. Because after singing the ghost opera, you need to change your name. I don't know why I need to change my name. By the way, my last name is Zhao as well. I'm Zhao Xian, the fairy of fairies. Sister Fairy said, stood up and looked at the dry and skinny old man on the stage who waved at her. Grandpa called me. The ghost opera will start soon. Kid, you don't have to be afraid. It's okay, ghosts really aren't scary. After the fairy sister left, Grandpa who walked over. No matter what happens later, you don't have to be afraid. Those female ghosts we invited will come to you and observe you. If any of them picks up this jade ring in front of you, it means she agrees to marry you. You'll just go straight to the bedroom. Go to the bedroom for what? Of course it's a cave-in. Grandpa who said naturally. Cave. Cave. I shivered and said, yes, you don't need to be afraid. You can do whatever she says. If your luck is too bad, and you run into a life-snatching stern ghost, then it can only be counted as your bad luck. The chances are slim, though, and they usually don't victimize the ones they choose. I sighed in relief. After Grandpa who finished speaking, he picked up the paper money on the ground and started burning it. The time just came to the hour, and he took an incense offering and lit the firecrackers at the door. Backstage of the theater troupe, 2 people in birthday suits also came out. Their faces were pale and their eyes were painted black. As soon as they came out, the woman said in a shrill voice, Midnight Gods Opera, please invite all gods to take their seats. Today's play is Widow's Grave. The female playwright had just finished her curtain call when a gust of gloomy wind blew in from the doorway of the courtyard. On a bench, the stone holding down the yellow paper fell to the ground, and the yellow paper was picked up by an invisible force. A whole stack flew from the top of the bench to the top of the table. As time passed, the female ghosts invited last night had all taken their seats. The female opera singer on the stage, at this time, had already flopped down on top of the male opera singer, crying and mourning continuously with an extremely shrill voice. My scalp was numb for a while, and I always felt that someone was touching me. I don't know how long. Around inexplicably suddenly came a burst of applause. I looked up and saw that the ghost opera had finished. That female opera singer once again said in a shrill voice, the widow goes to her grave. The play has been sung. Next is the second scene. The wife and young groom. The groom is already among the gods, and his birth date has been presented. If you are attracted to her, please accept the bride price and marry her as a young husband and wife. If you can't see it, thank you all for coming. The female opera singer retreated to the backstage after she finished speaking, and everyone else on stage also retreated in. There was also no more movement on stage. I was already scared to death at this point, and cold sweat broke out on my body. The table suddenly made a knocking sound, which scared me so much that I jumped up directly from the bench. A dozen or so ghastly white hands appeared around the jade pendant, and at the same time I jumped up, 2 palms rested on my shoulders, once again holding me down on the bench. Sisters, what is the meaning of this? Already shivering with fear. These hands were all disconnected from the elbows, and by now they had slowly left the tabletop, all grasping towards me. Extreme ate fate. I want it. I want it. It's been decades since anyone has offered me a sacrifice. This little waif is mine. All of you go away. I died early, she's mine. In that case, let's tear it apart and share it. I nearly fainted at the voices, my mouth shivering as I asked, what the hell do you guys mean? It means they all have their eyes on you. Zhao Yixian's playful voice rang out. Without waiting for me to speak, Zhao Yixian said in a cold voice, there's only one groom. You can't all have them. The prettiest one stays. The others get the hell out of this lady's way. As soon as Zhao Yixian said this, only one of the dozen or so hands was immediately left behind. You're mine. A terrifying voice reached my ears. Do you have the strength to deal with that 500-year-old snake demon? That female ghost froze, and before she could say anything, Zhao Yixian directly said, if you don't have it, then get lost and don't be an eyesore here. The female ghost actually unprecedentedly said, I'm sorry, and then directly left the place. At this time, the light bulb above the stage lit up. Grandpa rushed over from the backstage at the first time, looked at the table and sighed with relief. The jade ring is gone. It seems to have found the ghost's daughter-in-law. When the Z hour passes and the ugly hour comes, we'll send the little waif to the bedroom. Grandpa who plans to say. My eyes began to search for Zhao Yixian's whereabouts, but something strange happened once again. Where is Zhao Yixian still inside this courtyard? Classmaster, where is your granddaughter? I hurriedly asked. Granddaughter? What granddaughter? The class master asked in confusion. Zhao Yixin, the fairy sister who came with you. I said in a hurry. There were only 4 of us when we came. Boss, you'd better hurry up and settle the payment for us. We're leaving. After the troop left, Grandpa who hurriedly asked, tell me everything that happened just now. What happened to that Zhao Yixin? I hurriedly told the story over, but didn't mention anything about Zhao Yixin and I. Grandpa who fell into a deep thought after listening, that Zhao Yixin you mentioned might have been transformed by a snake demon. She came early. I was shocked and subconsciously said, impossible. How could Zhao Yixin be a snake demon? She even saved me just now and took my jade ring. Didn't you say that whoever took the jade ring meant that they agreed to marry me? Grandpa who froze as he looked at me with a slightly puzzled expression. Your kid wouldn't be in love with that snake demon, right? She's not a snake demon. I argued loudly. If it wasn't for her just now, I would have been torn apart by those female ghosts. There was some truth in what elder brother Zhaoplay said. That snake demon took the jade ring. So maybe he really wanted to marry her. Grandpa also nodded and said, old brother Hu, you have to be careful. Right now, we can only watch her. If that snake demon wants to claim her life, I'll just hand over my old bones to her. Grandpa, I'll go wait in the bedroom. If she really is a snake demon, I'll admit it. I then returned to the bedroom in my wide groom's clothes, and I sat down on the bed, still thinking about Zhao Yixin in my heart. As long as I saw her again, even if it meant death, I felt it was worth it. I waited from the hour until ugly hour, when Grandpa walked in, sighed, and said, it seems like this snake demon is really haunting you, collecting the bride price but not coming to you. She is trying to slowly torture you to death. Grandpa, if Zhao Yixin is really a snake demon, then she is also a good person. If she wants my life, I'll willingly give it to her. My expression was incomparably firm. Asshole, what a ghost. Have you forgotten how those 6 people in the village died? If she was a good person, would she have gotten them killed? Hurry up and take off your clothes and come with me. Grandpa's face turned blue as he rushed over in 2 steps, raising his hand and preparing to grab my groom's clothes. And at that moment, Zhao Yixin's voice sounded again. Yes, the child is right. I won't let those female ghosts hurt her. Zhao Yixin's shapely figure appeared in the doorway, looking even more moving in the yellowish light. I bent down violently to avoid Grandpa and ran directly towards her, jumping into her arms in a flash. Grandpa sighed when he saw her. Great immortal. What happened in the first place was my untalented grandson's fault. But 6 people have already died, so the great immortal's revenge should be enough. I don't know why Xian is bitterly pestering her. Zhao Yixin smiled wanly and reached out to hold me tightly in her arms, saying, Old Wang is afraid that he has misunderstood my little girl. Zhao Mo saved my daughter, so how would my daughter harm him? Saved you? Grandpa and I asked at the same time. People die and turn into ghosts, animals become demons, and since ancient times, animal cultivation has been against the heavenly Tao. Even to qualify for human form, it takes 500 years of Taoism. And in order to truly cultivate, it is even more necessary to remove 2 of the 3, and only one of the 3 remains. On that day, the other 2 spirit snakes and I were fighting for the right fruit, and when we could not resist, we bumped into the 6 people in the village. I thought that all 3 of us would have lost our previous efforts and all of us would have died in this calamity, but I didn't realize that I was lucky and only suffered a great deal of damage to my vitality, and I ended up staying inside Zhao Mo's coffin to recover my vitality. Hearing Zhao Yixin's words, I realized what was going on. She was indeed a snake demon, but it didn't matter to me that we were already married. I hurriedly asked, Sister Fairy, you told Grandpa that the deaths of those 6 people had nothing to do with you, right? Zhao Yixin sighed and said regretfully, those 6 people were not killed by me. It was they who killed the other 2 snakes, and their bodies were possessed by the spiritual snake's divine sense, which has been latent for 7 years, and they will surely die. I also want to save, but my heart is not enough. I see. Then this ghost-lifting theater of mine has instead attracted bad luck. Zhao Yixin shook his head and said, Old man, that's not the case. You also know that Zhao Mo's destiny is extremely een, and there will be a ghost disaster. After reading his 8 characters just now, I am even more certain that this destiny cannot avoid ghost fire. Zhao Mo is 12 years old this year. 12 is the number of the earth. There is still a chance of survival. 13 is the phase of the sky from the earth and the sky back. The sky is powerless and will surely die of fate. Although the ghost fire of the nearby cemetery mountain is fierce, but the little girl can still suppress a couple. If the ghost fire is attracted again by next year, then Zhao Mo will be 10 deaths. Zhao Yixin's tone was sincere. What the girl said is true. I also found out that this kid's destiny is special. Now that a great disaster is coming, I don't know how he should circumvent it. Grandpa returned with some worry. Zhao Xin turned her head to look at me and smiled gently. Little Prime Minister, don't worry. As long as you obediently listen to me, I promise to protect you. Calling me little eunuch was soothing to my body. You call her little eunuch. Is the girl going to marry this kid? Grandpa asked in surprise. Zhao Xin didn't shy away from saying, since I received the bride price, I should be married to her. Besides, she now has my scent on her. At that time, Zhao Mo had not yet gone up to the mountain to invite the ghosts, so if I did not leave my breath on her, I am afraid that she would have been killed on the mountain. If you leave my breath again, it will suppress her extreme destiny and no longer manifest. Now that the hour has passed, you should understand that this is the only way to save her. I naturally understand, but this will deplete your Tao, Miss Zhao, and those female ghosts will definitely not let you go. Zhao Xin shook her head and said, I can't care about that now. I'll go out now. Many thanks, Miss Zhao. Grandpa bowed respectfully, his face helpless. After Grandpa went out, Zhao Yixin's gentle voice rang in his ears. Young Prime Minister, tonight was originally our wedding night, but we can't wait until morning. Time is running out, so please do your best, young Prime Minister. Hearing this, I was instantly soothed. Fairy sister, you seem to have something in your words. I quickly got ready. Zhao Yixin let out a light laugh and said, heaven is long enough if you can't ever have it. With June in this life, there is nothing else to ask for. After these words, the inside of the room was suddenly filled with endless warmth. This time, it took less than a quarter of an hour for me to sound the retreat. And Zhao Yixin packed up the little Prime Minister. If you want to be good, stay inside the room, don't go anywhere. After Zhao Yixin finished, she turned around and walked out of the room. I hurriedly climbed up and saw the scene inside the courtyard through the doorway. In the middle of the courtyard, Zhao Yixin was surrounded by more than a dozen female ghosts, and there were constantly female ghosts pouncing towards her with their teeth and claws open, their sharp nails scratching at Zhao Yixin's body, leaving one blood mark after another. In less than 3 minutes, Zhao Yixin's tight blue dress had already been dyed purple with blood, and I couldn't look at it anymore and violently pushed open the door ready to go out. Stop it! You female ghosts, come at me if you have what it takes. Don't torture her. Those female ghosts all looked at me. A few had already floated to the door, their ugly, twisted and white faces stuck in the middle of the doorway, looking exceptionally terrifying. The female ghosts were staring at me. I couldn't move at all. It was as if I was tied up by the air. Zhao Yixin rushed over, reached out and pulled me into his arms, escorting me to a corner. Then with an angry expression, he said several words, and those female ghosts rushed in, their cold eyes all looking at Zhao Yixin. No one was interested in me anymore. And it was as if I had gone deaf. The inside of the room was a mess, but I couldn't hear half of the commotion. Zhao Yixin spoke to them for almost a minute, and those female ghosts eventually pounced. It was already sunrise when I woke up. Grandpa saw me and sighed in complete relief, finally awake. It seems like you dodged this bullet safely. Grandpa, who took over, yeah, just pity that Miss Zhao. I sat up violently, my mouth anxiously asking, Grandpa, where is Zhao Yixin? The two old men both shook their heads and sighed, not saying anything. I vaguely felt that. My fairy sister, the woman who called me little Prime Minister, the woman who was guarding me with her life, left. But I don't want to admit it, and I don't want to accept it. I'd rather live in a dream and let her live forever in my mind. I hurriedly grabbed the groom's clothes beside the bed, haphazardly put them on and said, Grandpa, I want to marry Zhao Yixin. Grandpa didn't object this time, but nodded heavily. Good. I'll take you to see her. I jumped up in excitement. Grandpa said he would take me to see her. Does that mean she's still around? Grandpa led me to the courtyard, where an extra earth bag had appeared in the west corner of the courtyard. In front of the earth bag stood a stone tablet and pen and ink. She went away, and we set up a grave for her here. You should pay your respects more often in the future. It will be good for her reincarnation. Grandpa who said. Looking at Grandpa's sad and serious expression, I knelt down in front of the grave and sobbed once again. Finally, the tears dried up, and I said breathlessly, Grandpa, Grandpa who? I want to marry her. Can I? Such a loving and righteous woman is worth it. Grandpa who took over and said, Grandpa brought a pair of candles, a wine pot and 2 cups and poured 2 cups of wine. Then he took out the jade ring and said seriously, Miss Zhao, thank you for helping Zhao Mo. Without you, she would be lying inside a coffin right now. Her life was given to her by you, and today she wants to pay her respects to you. So I'll be the one to fulfill you too. Grandpa poured one of the cups of wine on top of the jade ring. The wine touched the ring and a faint white mist rose up, then seeped into the dirt below. I picked up that glass of wine and drank it all in one go. Grandpa who sighed and said, "This snake immortal has strong feelings, and after the ghost play, he wants to change his name, but he can't be attached to it, and immortals and mortals will be separated forever. You will be called Zhao Lianfan from now on." I nodded, picked up the brush on the ground, and directly wrote 2 rows of bent and twisted characters on the blank wooden plaque. Tomb of West Zhaoixian, Zhao Lianfan erected. That night, I kept dreaming, and my dreams were all about Zhaoixian, especially the scene where she was surrounded by those female ghosts. When I got up in the morning, my entire pillow was soaked with my tears. Early the next morning, I took advantage of the fact that Grandpa hadn't gotten up yet, and shouldered a hoe and a shovel and headed out the door. I'm going to dig up graves, dig up all the graves of those female ghosts, and take out their bones to be exposed to the sun. They were the ones who killed Zhaoixian. I won't let them go. But just as I stepped out of the yard, it started pouring rain outside. I ignored it and dug up the graves of those female ghosts by mistake. I couldn't get this resentment out of my heart, and I was even thinking, why don't I just let those female ghosts get me killed? Maybe I'll be able to see Zhaoixian after I die. A person who doesn't even want her life. There's nothing that can make her afraid. I carried the hoe and shovel and ran furiously all the way, shedding tears as I ran. The taste of rain and tears mixed together was somewhat sour. After walking nearly 100 meters, I passed a familiar grave. This grave belonged to the mom of one of my classmates. I paid 2 obeisances to that grave and then continued to walk forward. But as I walked, I realized that I was back at her grave. I didn't see any of those female ghosts' graves that I was looking for. I was a little anxious, holding a vicious anger in my heart. Without digging up the graves of those dozen female ghosts, I was very unhappy in my heart. I continued to climb up the hill for a distance of almost 50 meters and turned my head to see once again the grave of my classmate's mother. The black and white photo on the tombstone stared at me closely, as if it had something to say to me. "Auntie, there's nothing wrong with me coming to dig the grave, but my target is not you, so don't fool me, okay?" I said helplessly to the tombstone. After saying that, I continued to climb up, but I once again saw my classmate her mom's grave. And this time, the black and white photo on that tombstone no longer had a smile and looked serious. This is strange. I put down the hoe and shovel, rubbed my eyes hard, and the expression on that photo changed again, into a very weird smile. I was in a panic, and suddenly remembered that when my classmate's mom died, her tongue was sticking out, her face was red, and her eyes were almost as if they were going to explode. I was crying with fear at the time. I winced and didn't look at the grave again, once again bypassing it and continuing up the hill. It wasn't a very high hill of graves, and I actually climbed for almost an hour. When I thought I was about to reach the top, I once again saw my classmate's mom's grave, and the photo above the tombstone actually turned out to be a horrible picture of her hanging herself. Looking at the photo above the tombstone, I felt a chill from the inside out, and my whole body was getting goosebumps. However, remembering Zhaoixian being hurt by those female ghosts, I forcefully swallowed my saliva and said, "Auntie, don't play with me, okay? I still have business to attend to." After saying these words, I felt that I was a little dizzy and looked up. Only then was I shocked to realize that I was still at the foot of the mountain and hadn't gone up the mountain at all. Ghost hit the wall. This word popped up in my mind. Grandpa said that if you run into a ghost wall, you can't go any further. Stay where you are and you'll be fine. I was so anxious to sit in the same place for a long time. I actually fell asleep on the ground. In my dream, Zhaoixian kept saying sorry. I asked her why she was sorry, but she didn't answer me, just kept saying sorry. I asked her where she was now, and suddenly a slap woke me up. Grandpa huffed and said, "Little brat, what are you doing here? And with a hoe and shovel, are you digging your own grave?" I reached out and rubbed my hot face and said firmly, "Grandpa, I want to dig the graves of those female ghosts, and I want to get all of their bones out and expose them to the sun. Are you tired of living it so hard to get past things? Why do you still want to come looking for trouble?" For Zhaoixian, I stubbornly climbed up, grabbed my hoe and shovel, and ran up the hill. Now that Grandpa had come over, that ghostly wall should be gone. Ever since Zhaoixian called me Little Prime Minister, I saw her as my wife. My wife was killed by those female ghosts, and as a Prime Minister, if I didn't help her take revenge, I would be too sorry for her. "You come back here. Is it useful to dig up their graves? Come back here quickly," Grandpa shouted anxiously from behind. I walked forward regardless. Grandpa was old and moved very slowly. He couldn't catch up with me at all, and could only shout loudly from behind, "You little brat, if you dare to dig up the graves today, I'll break your legs if you go back. Even if you beat me to death, I will still dig." I responded loudly. Finally, I found a grave, the picture above that tombstone. I remembered the incense Grandpa who had lit here before. The incense stick and that apple were still there. I flung the shovel on the ground and swung the hoe towards that tombstone. "You stop. Zhao Yixin isn't dead. You can't smash it." The hoe was about to hit the tombstone when I was suddenly yanked violently by a huge force, and my whole body lost its balance and fell heavily to the ground. Looking up, my grandfather stood panting in front of me, his face full of anxiety and anger. He snatched the hoe from my hand and viciously threw it aside. "What are you doing? Do you want to get killed?" Grandpa roared, his voice filled with helplessness and despair. "Grandpa, Zhao Yixin isn't dead? Where is she?" I didn't care about the pain of my fall and struggled to stand up to ask, "Are you crazy? What did you hear?" Grandpa grabbed my shoulders hard and looked serious. I heard her voice. She said she wasn't dead. I said stubbornly, a glimmer of hope flaring in my heart. Grandpa's expression became complicated as he took a deep breath and slowly said, "Son, Zhao Yixin is a snake demon. She's not like us. Her Tao is not enough to completely detach from her demon body, so she needs your help to continue her cultivation." "Where is she? Is she okay?" I asked anxiously. Grandpa glanced at me, turned towards a stone tablet not far away, and gently knocked on it. Suddenly, the ground began to vibrate, and a hidden stone door slowly opened, revealing a staircase leading underground. "Follow me," Grandpa said briefly before taking the lead and walking down. I followed behind Grandpa, my heart filled with doubt and anticipation. The steps snaked down, and the air around me gradually became gloomy and cold. I could feel a strong qi permeating the surroundings, and faintly I could hear low cries and murmurs. Finally, we came to a spacious basement. The walls were covered with yellow talisman paper, and complex formations were drawn on the floor. In the center of the basement, a huge bronze coffin lay quietly. "This is Zhao Yixin's place of cultivation," Grandpa said in a low voice. I walked forward and gently stroked the surface of the bronze coffin, my heart filled with mixed feelings. She needs to cultivate here. Only then will she be able to avoid her Tao being destroyed and continue to improve herself, Grandpa explained. Suddenly, the lid of the bronze coffin slowly opened, and a faint blue light overflowed from within. Zhao Yixin's figure appeared in the blue light, still as beautiful and moving as ever. She looked at me with tenderness and apologies in her eyes. "Young Prime Minister, I'm sorry for scaring you," Zhao Yixin said softly. "Sister Fairy, are you really all right?" I asked excitedly. "I'm fine. I just need time to recover." Zhao Yixin nodded and smiled. "Then what can I do for you?" I asked eagerly. Zhao Yixin looked at me and said softly, "You've already done a lot. As long as you're safe and sound, that's the biggest help to me." I nodded heavily, finally breathing a sigh of relief in my heart. At this time, Grandpa walked forward and patted my shoulder. "Son, Zhao Yixin's cultivation needs a quiet environment. We can't disturb her. You have to take good care of yourself and wait until her cultivation is complete before you can truly be with her." I looked at Zhao Yixin, my heart filled with determination. "I will wait for you until your cultivation is complete." Zhao Yixin smiled and nodded. "Thank you, young Prime Minister. I will definitely work hard on my cultivation and come back to see you soon." As I left the basement, I glanced back as Zhao Yixin's figure gradually disappeared into the blue light. I knew that this goodbye might be long, but I would keep waiting because she was the only fairy sister in my heart. Day by day, I continued to live in the village, trying to study and grow. Whenever it was late at night, I would always think of that blue dress figure, her gentle smile and determined eyes. Finally, on a full moon night, the bronze coffin in the basement once again emitted a dazzling blue light. I knew that my fairy sister had returned.